But today is a little different from our normal uh, office hours hangout. Today I invited Luke, from a guest from our latest episode on making coffee, to talk a little bit more about his book. Hi, Paolo. Talk about his book and talk about the specifics of much more strategic. In the podcast, we talked very much philosophy and a lot of high level and things that cross over. But if you guys have any specific questions, that's where today is where those will be welcome. Um, so yeah, I will just get started by welcoming Luke to Office Hours. And hey, so Luke, Office Hours is this very like casual place where I usually don't have
Having me as a
anything
guest.
prepared.
What's that?
I'm just explaining Office Hours.
Very cool.
No worries. Yeah, I'll let you, if you can give us a little background, if maybe folks didn't hear the entire podcast about your consulting background.
Yeah, so my background is working for coffee roasters, and I've done just about everything there is to do on the consuming side of the supply circle. I've opened a couple cafes, been a barista for a while. I've managed multiple units, and then moved into sales and found myself in operations in um, the last full-time role I was in. And it was in that role that I realized that my gifting is in helping coffee roasters structure their company to be more profitable, for one, but then also to optimize it for performance and to get rid of waste. And so that's sort of the my background and how I got to where I am. And the book is essentially just flushing out my thinking behind the my approach when I work with clients. So yeah, that's a quick history and background.
Awesome, thanks. And the book that Luke is referring to is called The Owner's Manual, and it'll be available in September. So I got to see an advanced copy of it, and it has 7 core areas that Luke focuses on. So there's sales, product, cash, green coffee, roastery operations, people, and wholesale. So my first question, Luke, is was how easy was it to get down to these 7? Like, was there a point where it was 10? Like, were there other things that you had to cut down? Or was this really clear from the beginning that these 7 areas were like the most impactful?
The cores the cores came out of, so when I first started the firm, I met with a friend of my dad's who does consulting for really large consumer product goods companies. Think like um, folks that make like mustard and condiments and uh, like protein bars. Um, he just asked me what my approach was and what the framework was that I work with clients, and I didn't have one. I knew I could help folks, but as a result of that, he really pushed me to just outline how I work with my clients so that if you have a framework, you can repeat it. If you have a way that you approach your work every time, no matter the circumstances, you can get repeatable results on a recurring basis. So after that conversation, I started to figure out, okay, what are the areas that are most typically broken or don't function very well within roasteries? And then, so that's one. So it's like a roasting as a, what we'll call it a factory. And then on the other side, we have to make sure that this is connected to business because it needs to make them money. And so that's where it's not the work that I do has really nothing to do with brewing or roasting coffee. It has everything to do with making the business function well. And so the process of getting to the core 7 was, what are the things that without these you won't have a roastery, or rather it won't be an efficient roastery. And so that was how I started to build a framework that was not sort of wasn't too many pieces, and was also just enough that if you're brand new, we know we need to add these things. Or if you're doing millions of dollars a year in top line revenue, you also need these things. And so that's how I got it down to 7 pieces. And frankly, I'm trying to remember if it was more than 7 at one point. I think it was. I started with sales, and I started. The next piece was cash, and then once I got to wholesale, I just stopped. I was like, I think we've got enough here, and I think this is. I don't think we need to go beyond this, because if you start going beyond this, it becomes overwhelming and not succinct enough to help the folks that are actually um, using the framework. Because we could have gone into, marketing. We could have added all these other elements, which are necessary, but I was trying to make it succinct enough that, again, somebody who's starting out or somebody who's doing millions and millions of dollars of revenue that's been around for 30 years can still apply the framework.
We have been talking about what are the overlaps between a small roastery and kind of the producer side that I work with, and what translates on both sides of the scale. And one of the things that I wanted you to dig into a little bit more today, Luke, is this concept of sales, because I think that both how small roasteries approach the sales of their roasted coffee, but also how producers are trying to sell their own green coffee. And I think that consumer facing challenge is very, very similar.
And I wanted to echo what you were about to say as I was listening to Luke. It's like the overlap for Origin, where you want a system where you can repeat and have consistency and not have waste and have efficiency. Is, I think, the conclusions you're starting to reach in your consulting, or not starting to reach, but um, that's where a lot of producers have difficulties, is that they if they don't have a system that they can repeat over and over and over again, um, they're going to fail.
Yeah, I mean
And
that's
so, well, yeah, right off the bat, I'm like, oh, well, that's applicable to us on the other side.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a theme that we talk often is reproducibility and repeatability, because if you don't have a system, you don't know if you're improving. And I think so often one of the things that Luke and I talked a lot about kind of back and forth is how informal coffee is, how informal, so much of it is learned on the job, things that are inherited. There's a lot of like trusting your gut, a lot of intuition, a lot of like figuring it out. And then because you have one harvest a year, you usually don't have that much time to like constantly reiterate. You're just having to try to catch the end of the harvest. So I just want to, Luke, are you able to hear us again and see us?
Yeah, my internet dropped, so I apologize, everyone. You were talking about sales, and that was the last thing I heard. I don't want to interrupt if there's a new conversation going on.
No, we were just, Lowell was giving his feedback on how he, as a producer in Honduras, also feels like sales, like having a system, having something that you can reproduce, like you can't progress and you can't get better if you don't know where you're standing. So I think this idea that the universality of some of the topics that you and I have been discussing on opposite sides of the chain. So I just wanted to give you a chance to jump in and talk about your approach to sales, like the idea of having a structure, having goals, having strategy. How do you talk to your clients about having that that component? Like what questions should we be asking ourselves?
It's good, and this is I literally was having this conversation yesterday with my owners group, and one of the folks has one wholesale account, and they're like, we know we need to grow, we don't really know what the steps are to get there. And the way that I explain folks that are in that stage is, you need to determine what is the sales cycle like, which sales cycle is just a fancy way of saying what is the time it takes from the time you first connect with a potential prospect to the time that they close. And it will be different for the different types of accounts you're going after. So for roasters, it's different. For like, it's for a cafe, it would be, it's anywhere from 6 months to 2 years is the typical sales cycle for on the roasting side of things. And then a local grocery could be a couple of weeks, but then national groceries are minimum of 6 months to 2 years. And so understanding your sales cycle for the type of accounts you're trying to get. So in your context, if you're working with a smaller roaster who doesn't understand how, they just buy everything from Royal or from a large importer, the sales cycle for something like that might be really, really long. And so trying to isolate what are the kinds of accounts we're going after and what is the probable timeline to work with them. The second piece is determining what are the steps that we're going to take. And my approach is very much like, I'm not going to tell you you need to do this, 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 and this. There are some rules around this, but one, are you going to send out a cold email? Are you going to send out samples? Are you going to send them a message on Instagram? What are the steps you're going to take? And to write them down and do the same thing every single time and record what the response is from those. Because perhaps sending a sample out doesn't actually work. Maybe you send a sample to a wholesale account and they never respond to you, or maybe you send them a letter. And so determining what are the steps that we're taking in our sales process, keeping really good records of what is the response to the steps that we're taking, and then making adjustments after you have some data around, okay, when I reached out to this type of account, this size of an account, or maybe this account's in this geography, they didn't respond to samples, but they responded to a direct message on Instagram or an email. So that's the second piece is determining what are the steps we're going to take. And it doesn't matter as much what they are. It just matters that you're keeping track of it and then making adjustments based off of what you're learning. And then the final thing is to understand, like, what is my approach here? And what I mean by approach, I'm really talking about what is your secret sauce? What are you known for? And to try to begin to isolate what kinds of accounts might be interested in the kinds of coffees that I'm selling as a roaster. And for you, I don't want to speak too much about the green side of things, but that's what I coach my clients with is what is the secret sauce that you have to then isolate, okay, these are the types of shelves I want to see my coffee.
So I wanted to, I'll let you in a second. I wanted to say that I am very guilty of this, or we are very guilty of this in terms of not having a process for our green samples. I think part of it comes in the kind of chaos of harvest and like, again, having like a really small window when you're trying to do a lot of things. And then you have this like supposedly downtime that doesn't end up being that slow after all. But we have sent many samples without a lot of thought as to what the next step is. Like, it's almost like sending the sample is enough. And I know that I'm very guilty about not following up. Or not following up in a methodical way. Sometimes I will follow up with a text message. Sometimes I'll follow up with an email. Sometimes I'll see them in person. And so, you're helping me realize how weak our own process is of sending samples. And I also wanted to just quickly ask you, I think this is also maybe a little bit more challenging for producers sending green samples versus a roaster that is trying to get an account, because we tend to work so much more internationally. So you have very many different cultures that you're working within. And for one culture, what may seem like a follow-up for someone else can be received as like really pushy. And it's like, oh, these Americans like always wanting to like every 24 hours check in, or, cultures work in different ways. So I was just wondering if you had any experience with how to follow up without being pushy, or if that's, something that even has entered your experience.
Yeah. There's one thing that I would say about follow-up. Most of us who are in coffee are very heart-led or passion-led, and there's a fear that we're going to like make someone upset or offend someone. And again, this is from an American perspective. You can annoy us. It's okay. We are not spending that much time thinking about you, frankly, as at roasters are, if they get a green sample that is unsolicited and has no information, they're not going to give that a second thought. And so, from the perspective of follow up, and what does that look like? Personally, my approach is I don't. If somebody's a prospect of mine that I want to work with, and I will not remove them as a prospect unless two things have happened. One, I have disqualified them, meaning they're too small, don't want to pay what I need to get paid, or maybe there's some other values disalignment. If one of those things happens, they're disqualified. I'm not going to reach out to them anymore. Or if they explicitly say, don't ever email me again, because then we know, okay, they're aware of us and they've made a decision that they don't want to work with us. That's fine. What I will say is there is some data around this, specifically around how often you should follow up. And typically, if you're following up more than 6 times without a response within about 6 months, it's too much. And so what I coach my folks to do is at least 3 follow-ups. If you're not at least following up 3 times, you haven't really done a good job of following up. Once it's beyond 3, it's diminishing return. So if you're following up 5 or 6 times, it's probably not going to help you, and you probably have more success following up with other accounts. But typically, you want to be at least 3 follow-ups within 6 months. And if they have explicitly told you, we don't want to talk to you anymore, then you can remove them as a prospect. But that's the rubric for following up. Was that what you were asking, or were you asking more of the mechanics of how to follow up?
No, I think that's great. Even just that is helpful to have an idea that 3 times is a reasonable amount of time. It's a reasonable average to check in, because I know that Nick is more in charge of doing our samples. That's not true for us. There are some people that maybe we'll follow up with once, and I'm also very shy in that way, where I'll follow up once and I'm like, oh, that's enough, they're not interested, and then I just go back into my hole. So having kind of that business perspective of 3 times is a reasonable amount of time, and then you can move on. Aysen, you have your video on. Did you want to say something?
I think what you're talking about, Luke, makes perfect sense. That's not why I raised my hand earlier, but you kind of made a system that's made for evolution. So that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, how do you say follow up in Spanish? Dar seguimiento is how you would approach it in Spanish. So dar seguimiento to a particular contact or email. Yeah, I'm just, again, really thinking about our particular situation and how we will send samples with no plan. I think we're very used to people being interested in oh, I want to try the coffee. And even for us, really thinking about, is it worth, especially starting out, this is our, 3rd harvest, thinking getting more eyeballs, getting more, interest into a sample seems like a good idea. And then you have to realize how long it takes to prepare the samples, the expense of mailing the samples, and then do I actually want to do all of the follow-up? So I think being able to ask ourselves, do we need to, does every request need to be fulfilled? Probably not.
You are touching on something really important here. If somebody requests a sample, you don't have to give it to them. And I'm imagining how much it costs to send a green sample. How many samples are you sending in one? We're calling it a sample, but how many are in each box or bag or whatever you're shipping in? How many is your typical sample size?
So for us, we're really lucky that we just do one for this reason. The reason that I didn't want to have to send 10 different samples, because here's our honey, here's our natural, here's our washed, here's my, this yeast fermentation. So I thought about how to make my life easier by not having all those different SKUs we do just send one sample. So even that's already easy, but still there is, it still requires a lot of follow-up and work that I don't always want to do. And so a lot of times we don't stop to ask ourselves, do I want to do the work that this sample would like open up? But yeah, most producers would probably send 5 or.
Yeah. And I'm imagining it's well over $100 per sample to send 100 USD.
How much
in
was it?
shipping.
Nick just sent some samples.
Yeah, I just sent 5 samples in one box to Norway, and it was $200.
Okay. Yeah.
It was just obscene.
Just out of
expensive.
curiosity,
Oh.
what's in the chat? Would y'all mind putting in what your total? What does an average sample cost you to ship, and then what is the most you've ever spent on samples shipping?
So is that our highest, 250?
I think so far,
Yeah.
because we were sending it to a friend who wanted to taste a variety of things we've done this year. So it was a specific case.
Yes. Yeah, and it was not a customer. They were not going to buy coffee. It was more of a favor.
Well, but in
Okay.
that regard, though, for the past 2 years now, we've only sent samples when I go to the U.S. So I take them with me and ship from the U.S., which is like you have to factor in the cost of my plane ticket and the amount of like my energy to carry it to the U.S. and ship it from the U.S. But
Yeah.
it's like I'm already going, so we kind of factor that in of like, okay, well, it's a fraction of the cost to ship from there, even internationally, but it's still expensive.
Yeah, that's what I
We
think.
do the same thing. It's like the plane ticket, and then it's like you would spend the same amount shipping 50 pounds of coffee as the plane ticket. So you might as well fly to the States and do something else and then mail them all out. Very expensive. And then when somebody's like, oh, we didn't roast that sample after all that effort and money.
That's what I was getting at is, and this is why when we talk about sales, we have to consider, is the person we're sending this to, how many bags are they realistically going to buy from me? And does me sending them $100, $200, $300 worth of samples, we're just talking about shipping. We're not even talking about the green and your time or anything else. Does that count? Do they have high enough intent that it's going to make sense for me to send the sample out? And that's the thing that on the roasting side of things, oftentimes unsophisticated salespeople will send out samples to anybody who asks, regardless of who the account is, their size, their volume, or if they have any intent other than I just want to taste some interesting coffees.
Yeah, I think having that criteria is really interesting. And I think David in Panama just mentioned that they will charge for, if it's a new request, they'll charge for the samples. And then if they purchase, then that will, I guess, be refunded or kind of discounted from the purchase price. I think that is a really good strategy. And I think also what I like about these spaces is the idea that some people are already doing that, and then having that kind of like permission. It's okay to say, hey, this is expensive for me. Can you cover the cost of shipping? And if you make the purchase, we will.
And this also doesn't even take into account to ship green samples legally. You have to get a fitosanitario for every single sample, which is an extra headache to obtain those things and pay for those things. So the time it takes to put all that together, I can just put it in my suitcase and they don't even look at it, right? So it's a kind of that thing where most people don't have that opportunity to take it to the US and ship it from the US. So they have to go through that headache of getting all the proper paperwork for each sample. And it has to be well documented, otherwise DHL won't even look at it.
Yeah.
Two things that you said that I think are really important to re-emphasize. One is that the timeline of things. A lot of times I'll get requests for samples like right now in July. And that says to me clearly somebody doesn't understand our harvest cycle. Because what sample would I send you in July? Because we don't start harvesting until January. But to me, the response is, instead of saying, yeah, I'll send you samples, the response is, let me educate you on our harvest cycle and how we do things, and give them that timeline so that now, instead of being a late conversation in July, where, like right now, we're exporting coffee to the US January. So it's very, maybe it's okay. Maybe for me, it's very late to be having a conversation about buying coffee. I've already made decisions on what we're going to export. But it's early to start the next cycle conversation with people. And then the second thing is where you mentioned values. If somebody's asking for a sample from us, I tend to think if they're going to make a decision based on the sample, they're not the right fit for us, because our marketing and our essence is relationship and that farmer roaster connection and things like that. So it's like if 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 you have to have some like 90 plus coffee that was fermented for 12 months, we're not your people. And so a lot of times that decision making based on samples seems to be almost a turnoff for me. It's like the coffee will be good. That shouldn't be the decision making process for you. So
Yeah, I really want to echo what Lowell is saying. At least that's also true for the coffees that we make, is that the quality of the coffee is almost besides the point. Like, it will be good. There is a baseline, there is a consistency there, but you're buying it to have some other kind of impact, either impact in the community, either of, a project that you want to support, or a philosophy, or a vision. Like, there's something else. It's not just about the coffee. So yeah, I agree with Lowell that there is, the sample sometimes feels like performance. Yeah, it's like, okay, we're gonna have to do this thing because this is like the business standards, but it's not about the sample. Luke, speaking of sales, I also wanted to move over to cash. I think another thing that is cash is the core, one of your core items in the book, and I think it's another topic that we can get a little bit wrapped around, talking about money, how uncomfortable it can be to talk about money just in general in our lives, and then also like in our business. And I just wanted to kind of bring that up again, like the idea of why is it important to get comfortable talking about money. And another question that you had in your book that really kind of made me sit back for a moment was, what are you avoiding in your business? I read that and I was like, I need to sit with that for a moment. Okay. So can you please talk to us about why you felt this chapter was important to include, and how do you talk to your clients about that?
Yeah. When I was writing the cash section, so I used to run a design firm, and we only worked with folks in green coffee, and I since have stopped doing that. And when I was writing that section, I was just like teetering on, am I going to close this thing? Am I going to keep doing this? Like, it wasn't really, it wasn't, it was profitable, but it wasn't paying me anything. And this is what I want to do, is work with folks in coffee on the roasting side of things and have connection to origin and all that. So I was personally going through and evaluating and asking myself the same question of, what am I avoiding? What in my business am I avoiding? And I think the illustration that I use in the book is, we hide things under the rug. We're like, oh, we'll fix that financial problem when we get a bigger account, or when we, release this new product, or when we hire the next person who's going to, increase our sales, or what have you. And then we keep shoving stuff under the rug. And I'm saying I'm pointing at myself when I'm saying that. And then the bump in the rug on the floor gets so big, it's just unavoidable. And then you don't have a choice but to peel that rug back and deal with what's underneath there. And so the reason I included it was, one, for myself, and then two, for the owners that I work with. This is a huge challenge. They are oftentimes, again, I go back to the people that are in coffee are often get into coffee from their heart. And as a result, they are oftentimes forgetting that we have to run a sustainable business that makes money, that takes care of me, my family, my team, and so that we can also pay equitable prices for grain. Without this, we have a hobby, and it's not helpful for the whole supply circle. We have to, and I'm saying we as in on the consuming side of the business, on the roasting side of coffee, we have to get our cash settled, because if we don't have our if we're not putting on our own mask and breathing oxygen, i.e., cash, we don't have a business, and we can't actually pay for the coffee that we want to purchase from folks like yourself. So that's why I thought it was important to include in the book. Was it's a huge stumbling block for folks, and when we're raised, at least in the U.S., we're told not to talk about money. We're told don't talk about money, don't talk about it with your friends, don't tell anybody how much mom makes, don't like that's just not allowed. But when we're in business, money is a function of business, which means that when we say $500 or $500,000, that has to sound and feel the same when we're communicating it to the folks that we're talking to, whether it be a potential account that a roaster's trying to close. They have to understand that the thing that keeps our business alive is cash. The thing that's going to keep your business alive is cash. And so we have to be okay with looking at that and be okay with the reality of, oh, there's a big bump in this rug that I'm standing on. I have to look at this, and I have to sort out the cash side of things.
Yeah, I also really liked that you reminded us of things that are, again, really good basics. And for me, reading that chapter was very much about, if you are uncomfortable around money, if it's something that you don't want to talk about, it's going to be hard for you to be that successful. It's going to be hard for you to make a lot of money or enough money that you feel comfortable if it's a thing that you don't want to talk about and you don't want to look at, and it makes you just like, ugh, kind of put it off to the side. So you kind of have to reconcile these things of saying it's hard to be successful if money makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I forget who said it, but the thing that you avoid is the thing that gives you anxiety. And if we're avoiding money, if we're avoiding rip the band-aid off, we have to pull the rug back. We have to confront that because it's a fundamental need for our business. And without it, without wise financial practices, we don't have a very good business. And specifically roasters, a lot of them are artists, they're creatives, they're musicians. They are doing it out of a desire. They're doing coffee out of a desire to essentially create art. And they are not doing it oftentimes to make money, which ends up hurting them in the long run because they have good desires oftentimes, but the practice of how do they implement those desires they have is oftentimes where the disconnect happens, and it often happens around cash. I'll give you one final example, then I'll stop talking. I had a client that I started working with almost 4 years ago now, and 3 months into our engagement together, I told him, I said, you have to raise your prices 20% in order for you to get to 10% net profit, because they were losing they're losing 10%. And I was like, you have to raise your price at least 20 to get to 10. And 4 years later, three and a half years later, he still has not done that. And as a result, he's still struggling. And so when I'm talking about the thing we avoid, if you know the solution and you're choosing not to, you're just going to keep going around the same circle. And that's a pattern that I see with roasters is avoiding money and avoiding their beliefs around it and their understanding of it, and it
with instability. Like when you talk about money and anxiety, a couple of years ago, we would spend $100,000 to move 2 containers. And in 2025, that 2 containers was going to cost over $500,000. And so that creates anxiety. When you fail with $100,000 or when you fail with $500,000, and it seems like the risk of failing in 2025 was much greater with the instability of sea and tariffs, and so I wonder how roasters are doing, because on our side I feel like my eyes might pop out of my head.
not alone. It's happening on both sides of the industry, and everyone's scared. At least on this side of the supply circle. I was on a call yesterday with a roaster from LA, and it was a group call, and I was asking everybody. I was like, so how y'all gonna work? How are you gonna confront the Brazil tariffs? Because the U.S. is putting a 50% tariff on products coming from Brazil, and that's supposed to go into effect in August 1st. And one of the roasters just turned pale, and it was the first time they were hearing about it. And one of their core components to their espresso blend, and I believe their house blend, is 80% Brazil. And he's already contracted everything, and there's nothing he can do about it. Like, it's contracted, it hasn't landed yet. It's going to land after August 1st. And so to your point in terms of how do you handle that, there's no way to prepare for it. Like, there's no magic bullet, except for the fact that right now, especially, and I'm looking at this from the lens of roasters, we have to be constantly watching the news, and we have to have such tight handles on our pricing that we can then say, all right, it's a 50% tariff. We're already contracted. We don't have a choice. We don't get to think about whether or not we raise this price or not. We have to raise this price on our espresso blend because 80% of what is in here is going to cost us twice as much. And so from a roasting perspective, that's how I'm coaching people, is that you have to be watching the news every day. This is not a moment to relax. The thing in between the lines and on the margins and around all of the words is, and I'm stealing this from Caleb Holstein. He is in Australia and runs a company called Green Square. And he said something that I just can't shake. We've not increased our prices for 70 years. And nominally we have, but not significantly across the board. So how do we address the anxiety? The anxiety is we have to be conscious of what's happening in the news, but then we also have to be so intimately aware of what's happening in our business that when we get notice of, okay, this is what's happening, we now have to change our pricing tomorrow. We don't get the luxury of waiting 6 months or waiting and seeing what happens. We have to take action as soon as possible. I don't think I answered your question because there isn't a good one to it, but that's what I'm coaching folks to do.
Speaking of the pricing, I'm just looking over at the chat at Paolo's question about Italy. So Paolo's in Italy, and he says that, for example, Italy is a country where espresso sells for €1.20 and cafes move high volumes, 2 to 5 kilos per day per bar. The product is low quality and contains a lot of Robusta, especially from Vietnam. Most roasters provide equipment on loan, machines, cups, and various accessories. We have very few specialty coffees. Other European markets are different with its own characteristics. How can we find a common rule? So Paolo's a huge specialty fan, and he really likes a lot of interesting coffees, and he's part of a coffee club. There he is. He's part of a coffee club that gets to taste very exotic and interesting different coffees. So you are, I guess, Paolo, would you say, I would say you're not a typical Italian in that way, right? Most Italians are not seeking what you're seeking.
Do you know about it was famous? So when I read about the book, I was thinking about the difference between the market because I make a tour last week in Netherlands and Belgium, and the market is completely different from Italy. Because in Italy, especially in the south, there was with a friend of mine was have a small roastery in the south. They drink a lot of coffee, 5, 6 for person one day. And they have a great volume of coffee, but with a gram. This is the fact. So the quality of espresso is really different from the other country. And we have also a preference for blend and especially Robusta blend. But the difference that also in a speech with Cosimo Libardi, with Lisa Farr, talk about this problem. Italy, the roaster give the machine, the cup, the sugar, the curtain, the table, the money, everything. And so when you buy a coffee, a bag of coffee, you don't buy only a coffee. You buy a lot of things. And so the quality of coffee is secondary. So when you, I think that you talk about USA market or similar market. I don't know what because also I test a lot of coffee, some coffee from USA, and are very different from the roast type, quality, perception, fermentation, from the coffee that we find in Europe. So to Netherlands, you find a lot of fermented coffee, many small roastery with very high quality. In Italy, for example, in my region, we are one. There is no. There is one bar. They say I am a specialty coffee. Okay, it is a word. But so when you talk about profitability, it is very complicated. This um, is very complicated because I think that every country is different. For example, in Italy, roastery in Europe near my home, for example, that make 1 million kilo per year, and they make a lot of money with during the year. Now, I don't talk about the last period that there was the change, the rising of the price, and so we don't talk about it. But in the last 20 years, they make incredible money from this construction of give you a machine, you pay me this, basta, this confused. So make a rule for our country for me is very complicated. What do you think?
I want to make sure
Sorry for.
no, it's good. I want to make sure that that I understand your question. So you're saying because the Italian market is built off of the model of I want to open a cafe, I go to Lavazza, I go to, Italy, what have you, and they say, "Don't
Yeah, the
worry,
situation
we'll
is
buy everything."
you. The situation, the Italian, no, infatti in this poster Cosimo Libardo focus on this. It say in Italy you could open a bar without money because the roaster give you money, machine, and so you have just a little amount of money. You bought no
Open a cafe, maybe?
something. The remaining item of the bar, but the focus is made with the gift that you pay in the coffee of the roaster. So the market is very complicated here. But I know that there are many European countries that are similar. For example, Germany, they say, a friend of mine who sell coffee in Germany, they say they started also the last year, they start to loan machine and so also in other countries. But you talk about low quality bar, no commercial, no specialty.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge, and in very well developed coffee markets, that's a pretty common thing. Hey, don't worry about it. We'll provide everything. You just have to buy your coffee from us.
Sorry, but the USA, you are talking about franchising bar because you have independent. There are independent cafe, but I believe I don't know. I don't know so deeply the USA market that are very few independent coffee or not.
You're saying are there independent cafes
Cafes. Yes,
in
the
the U.S.?
few. Yeah, USA.
There's a lot, but the same model exists. And what's different about the U.S. market and the Italian market from what you're explaining is the distributors that provide that will say we'll provide all of the equipment, but you have to buy the coffee through us. But then the distributors will have a handful or maybe even dozens of different roasters they work with. They just have to buy that coffee from the distributor. Um, so
They make a contract. You are you
correct.
have to buy the coffee for 5 years because in Italy they give a machine and you have to sign that for 5 years you have to buy the coffee from the roaster. Other way, you have to pay a penalty or
Correct.
many other problem.
Correct.
Or
Sorry,
also
looks like
in the
there may have
USA.
been.
Sorry,
there-
yeah,
sorry, were
I
you
want
gonna
to interrupt for a second because we're almost out of time, but I did want to circle back to what Aysen was
Sorry.
saying about the design phase regarding samples.
Sure, I'll take that as a clue, and I'll try to be really fast.
No,
Um,
go ahead.
So I have a new system that I've been building up for a few years, and I'm making adaptations to the system at the moment to, in 2 years' time, I'll have coffee to harvest. So I need a good system. So my system is based on filtering and having data. So first off, I need to know my coffees. So I need to understand three things. I need to understand the sensory part. I need to understand how the heat conduces and transports inside the seed. And there are calculus we can do to get this information. And I also need to understand how the evaporation profile of that seed is during the roast. So with this data, I can have like a video conference with my client abroad. I can tell them this coffee gives you this flavor profile, but it only does that with this roast profile. So you kind of you make a foundation for what you're saying. You're not just throwing a sensory profile out there. You give them the why this happened. And then you can see what kind of equipment they have and see if they can possibly do the kind of roasting that does well for this coffee. And if they have too big a plant and they can't be agile enough, that separates a whole bunch of coffees where you need to have an agile roaster to be able to compensate for crazy evaporation profile, for example. So, and you can also start making coffees on demand, setting the conductivity of the seed and setting more or less the evaporation profiles. You can start making coffees on demand for clients. So if you do this kind of filtering first, when you can actually sort who should have what sample.
Super fascinating. Can I ask you a couple questions?
Your samples. Of course, Luke.
How are you handling the difference in water across countries?
Well, you need to ask what kind of water, because everyone has to roast for their water. Like I have really difficult water in Belo Horizonte, which is the state capital here in Minas, in Brazil. And our water is chalky, it's dry. And if you don't have really developed roasts with really rounded off, really nice acidity and high sweetness, you're going to be drinking something that just dries your mouth out. It's really, really difficult. So you need to understand how the coffee works with different water profiles. You could do something simple just to get started. You know, you buy like 5 different bottled waters with different mineral profiles, and you just start cupping coffees that you already know. And soon enough, you're going to set up a system. You'll see, what pH does, what different minerals does. That magnesium, if you have too much, will get salty. That if you have sodium above like 15 parts per million, it's going to be very obvious in your mouth. There's a whole lot of things you can start seeing and start understanding your own limits and how you read stuff.
So you need to understand what water quality. So the expectation is that the roaster will then give you their water quality or water test, and then you can say, okay, given your water quality, these are the things that is how you would approach roasting this coffee.
Yeah, so it's data driven, but it's surprisingly general because depending on how you harvest and how you dry coffee, it reacts in different ways. And depending on how clean it is, how many defects it has, if it's a low quality or low density defect, how does that affect the roast? How can you get them out the cheapest way, for example? So doing this design I'm trying to go one step backwards, which is, trying to include nutrition into the system. But that's going to take me a few years. So I'm just starting to plant now. And we're doing agroforestry systems. We're planting shaded. So this is going to be a lot of fun to continue looking at. But basically I have Icava data that I can use in Cropster. I can compare how different kinds of production, how the curve moves and what kind of corrections you need to be. And if these corrections are possible in modern systems. And, you need to know what to do, how much, and when. And if you can get all those things right, you can smooth out all the oscillations and you have coffees that become super soluble without losing the richness. So, you get really nice trade-offs.
I think the
You said my
information
favorite word,
that's
solubility.
that's missing, Luke, is that Einstein is also he's not a typical producer. He's also a consultant. So he has a lot of systems thinking behind his approach. And I also want to say on the chat, Nelson mentioned that there's a Science of Coffee series with James Harper that I co-hosted. So we just did 2 episodes about water. James kind of helping me figure out our water here on the farm. And in this next coming series, I'm doing another collaboration with James to talk more about water from the producing side, about how important it is to know your water, how can you do some testing with your water, because there have been so many misunderstandings in terms of the quality of a coffee based on somebody's water. I've been in cupping rooms where actually Nick we'll put a link to, sorry, I'm responding to the chat. David will put a link to those podcast episodes in the chat. But where coffees have been rejected, like a sale has been made or left on the table just from water, or the advice of, oh, your coffee doesn't have enough acidity, you should try this type of fermentation, when the problem was just try a different water. So there's so many places where producers can get really bad advice or just really kind of lose a lot of time when they don't need to change their process or plant a new variety. It could just be having a better water match. Luke, I want to thank you for your time and be respectful. I said until 10, so I know we still have a few more questions, so if you wouldn't mind sticking around for a few
Well,
minutes.
Yeah, I'm super good to stick around. I blocked off the next half hour, so we had some connectivity issues, so yeah, I'm good for next 30 minutes.
Oh, you're spoiling us. Paolo, you had a comment?
I say about water. The solution is about zero water and construct the water. Add the salt. This is to have equal the same water all around the world. You bought €50 on Amazon. You have no mineral in the water, and then you add the mineral. It's very cheap. You have the same water all around the world.
Einstein?
Yeah, we can do the same with roasting profiles. If somebody really wants to invest, we could set up like a small national office in 20 different countries that has good roast staff that can actually do mapping of how coffee roasts and put them into a system. That we already sell coffees through a portal that gives you a solution how you need to roast, and can have a consultant and can tell you, like, can your machine do this? How can you approximate as much as possible? It's just investment, and it's really simple. You just have to have the money for the technology and know how to use it. It's all there.
Awesome. Jack, did you want to say something? Or were you just saying hi?
No, I was just saying hi, but I want to come spend a month with Einstein, trying to learn a little something.
Well,
Time to travel.
I see your binoculars. Are you in Colombia?
Oh, no, I'm in my backyard, but there's a lot of bird activity that I can't ignore. So I've got baby bluebirds that are in the tree in front of me. But I have a cousin, my wife's cousin is buying coffee in Nariño and wants to send me samples. And I just, I've had people wanting to send me samples for a long time, and I want to know what a better way to. I'm in Minneapolis right now, so I've got a few places I can take them, but these kids in Nariño are really no coffee and are finding great coffee there, and I need to hook them up.
So you're saying you're getting these samples and you want to make sure you respect the samples.
Well, they want to send me samples, so I want to make sure that it's worth their expense, because they want to do it now that this is harvest season in Nariño. So I'm not going until November. I'll probably bring back some samples, but they want to send me a big box of samples and have me redistribute them to some roasters and importers here, I guess.
Cool. Einstein, you're saying you have a presentation that maps out the process of designing raw coffee made for roasting. Cool. Well, then maybe we can plan for that on the next office hours. Is that maybe you could give us the presentation and then we'll have it recorded, something like
I'd
that.
love to. And when is the next one?
So it's every other week. Let's say today's the
Yeah,
18th. Let me see. Next Friday.
I'll have to look at my calendar because I don't want to do a repeat of when I did a month ago.
You stood us up. Um,
It's terrible.
no, no worries. Sorry, let me look at the calendar real quick. Month 18th. So it would
And
be
now
the
you have the
1st.
video.
The 1st of August.
Yeah, August is pre-preparation for planting. So August, I'm going to be at the farm, and there I even have 5G. So that's awesome.
Cool. Well, then we'll plan that for August 1st. Micah, thanks for joining. Good to see you. I know some people have to leave. Just trying to think, was there anything else? That's mostly what I wanted to cover with you, Luke, was kind of the sales and the cash and just really opening up the conversation about money, because I think we can always, as comfortable as we are, get a little bit more comfortable sharing. And again, like having our cultural setting of like what was rude or what was allowed, and then also like that business layer on top can be some things. And maybe some people don't realize like how like it's so unquestioned. You're like, oh, we just don't talk about that. And like kind of realizing the water that you're swimming in. Luke, was there anything else that you would like kind of to share with the audience that you felt like now, and kind of talking with me and having me draw out some of these comparisons that you have found? So maybe something that I haven't identified.
There's something, it goes back to what we were talking about around samples. And one of the things that I hear from roasters often is unsolicited samples, without, and you kind of touched on this, Lucia, without an actionable next step. And I hear often from roasters on this side of the supply circle that they'll receive samples without any information of how to contact the folks that grew them. And it just like, it hurts me every time I hear it. I'm like, I know you spent $100, $150, $200 on these samples, and there's no, even if it was great, even if they cupped the coffees and loved them and wanted to buy, the whole lot. And so that I just wanted to kind of hone in there, and just even just like a phone number, or a WhatsApp number written somewhere is better than nothing. And so I just wanted to close the loop there. It's just whatever you do, even if your samples are in just a plastic bag, just make sure there's some way to get a hold of you. I feel like everyone on this call probably is already doing that and more. But share that with your friends that maybe don't know that. Make sure that all green samples have a way to get in touch with who.
No, I think that's great advice. And one of the things that we talk about is there's nothing too basic, because we can always be reminded of those simple things. And a lot of times, I also still get samples from previous clients, and there's like some context there where they think like, of course, they know that I know who they are, but it can just kind of getting rid of that little bit of friction of saying, not making somebody do that extra work and like Google you, look up your name, and having 50 Finca Esperanzas like show up, and you're like, wait, which one is it? Is it the one in Colombia, or is it the one in Guatemala, or is it Finca Esperanza in Peru? So I mean, that's also another one of like, not in my purview as a consultant, but when I feel familiar enough with the client to just sort of mention having a more unique name, like we can get really stuck in Finca Paraísos, and like there's so many in the world of the internet. It can get very confusing very quickly when you're trying to find those. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think green samples are the equivalent of like a cold call or like a cold email of an introduction, and just getting rid of that friction of. The other thing I mentioned was including, yes, a contact number, and then also the process, being able to, I know roasters would like to match the profile of, this is how I roast natural samples, this is how I roast wash, something like that. And if a producer has like a fantasy name, then it may be hard for somebody who's like looking at the sample to say, how do I want to roast this? How is this going to kind of show up the best way? So I'm a big fan of very simple, like at least for samples, very simple naming instead of the more marketing name that can accompany a lot of these coffees. So cool. Well, thanks for hanging in there. Thanks everybody for hanging out today. It was good to see you, Luke. As always, enjoy our conversations. I imagine we're gonna have more in the future. And yeah, I'm going to if there's anything that you guys missed, this is recorded. It'll be up shortly on the replay.
I wanted to just say thank you so much for inviting me to speak with these folks, and it's super good to meet each of you, and thanks for sharing your platform, and it's a really cool community what you've built here, and thanks for letting me be part of it for a day.